Ethan Sorochman asks, how do you keep yourself motivated and awake when you get drained and tired later in the day's work? When you're drained and tired, motivation can be mechanical. That is to say, you might not feel, that to me is my institutional knowledge and my professionalism. Because on the clock, no one cares if you're drained. When you're doing 14s on set, no one cares. So you just got to bear that and you do it, right? You just keep on asking, what's the next thing for me to do? So it's not about motivation in a professional setting necessarily, although motivation is nice to have. But here in the cave, when I am drained, I said earlier in this live stream that I've spent so much of my professional life, like any professional does, gaining control over my aesthetic and my output of what I get to do, what I get to spend my time and energy on. And I have that. And one of the hardest things for me to learn in the cave was when to leave. Because for so long, the time I got in here was so scarce that it's not surprising that I treated time in the shop like a scarcity model. So it'd be like my partner would say, when are you coming home? And I'd be like, 5? And I'm just like naming a time in the future so that I can spend as much time in the cave as possible. I'm slowly shedding that scarcity model feeling. And for me, part of being attuned to my motivation is knowing when to stop throwing good money after bad and when to go home. That being said, I get a lot of solace out of a minor cleanup. And by a minor cleanup, I mean all the things on the bench in front of you, they could go away. They all have homes, probably. And even though that bench looks like this pile of crap that you don't want to deal with, if you literally spend 10 minutes, set a timer on your clock, spend 10 minutes just taking up this object. And what's overwhelming about a pile of stuff on the table is it's a pile of stuff and none of it goes to the same place. It's like 40 things and they go to 40 drawers. That's exhausting to think about, but it's not exhausting to execute. And 10 minutes is usually all it takes to clear a table surface. And that gives me motivation. So definitely, I talked about using my sleep like a bank account. Years and years ago, I have this mode sometimes. If it's the middle of the night and I'm sweaty and I can't sleep and I'm like insomniac and all that. Meditation, absolutely one of the most tried and true methods for me to fall right to sleep. But if that doesn't work, I will get out of bed. I will make the bed, make it nice and crisp, fluff the pillows, and then I'll get back in. And I swear to God, I almost always fall right to sleep. That's the same thing that I think a clean workbench gives you, is a little bit of extra. I mean, when you are stressed and drained and tired and your workbench is a 8-inch circle of cleared space with all the crap you've been using for the last 3 days, building this volcano around it. You're there working in the caldera. That is not a spot for motivation. And it's not just enough to push everything away. So I like getting out, getting up, moving around the cabin, putting stuff away. That definitely feels like kind of the way to show the room the respect that it needs so I can go back and keep executing. Mike is making stuff says, given all things being equal priority, how does one avoid analysis paralysis with an overwhelming number of future projects? I am right there, all caps, at the moment. So Mike is making stuff. Given all things being of equal priority, you've started with an impossible precept. Because in the overwhelming number of future projects, there are categories. There are categories of, you could split them into 2 categories, easy to execute, hard to execute, and then some subcategories there. You could also categorize them by the length of time they would take to execute. You could categorize them by the skills you do and don't have and do and don't want to have as part of that execution. I am going to say that when you are in the middle of the analysis paralysis, I think the deciding factor should be your desire. Is there something that you want more than anything else? Getting rid of all the other parameters with which to examine it, how hard it is to execute, how expensive, how much time, etc. What do you want? Is there, you know how you can't decide what to eat at the restaurant? And the axiom that I love is, what did your eyes stop at like more than twice? That's probably what you should order. I love that rule. I've ordered some wonderful things by going that way. I would imagine if you took the projects that you have in front of you and you laid them out one after the other, and you asked yourself, which is my favorite? First thought, best thought. Then you'd probably have an answer. Which do I want the most? You'd probably be able to come up with an answer. That's where I would start. I think of making. There's an older maker with a question in here who says they don't like the term making. James Wiley Dumas, I understand your dislike of the term maker, but we're old dudes and nobody cares what we think on that front. Maker is the newest term for the oldest thing. I'm using it because it's communication. That's why I use the term. I don't have to like it. I don't even have that big a problem with it. It just seems like it's not necessary. But again, my opinion doesn't matter about this. Our opinions don't matter about this. Making to me is about momentum, and largely about momentum, building momentum, corralling momentum, boosting it when necessary. Part of going home when I'm really cracked out at the end of the day is about maintaining a proper momentum and not just grinding it out until I hate looking at this thing. So that's why I redound to, what do you want out of those future projects? And maybe it's about literally putting them on index cards and putting it in front of you. And like, where does your hand want to point? That's often where the interesting thing is. Oz DeLorean says that they've been listening to the still untitled back catalog on Spotify and listened to our Hunter Thompson episode. If you don't know who Hunter Thompson is, I'm going to give you some perspective on Hunter Thompson. If you're reading journalism and the journalist is part of the story, this is a pretty standard thing, right? This happens all the time. We see this all the time. But back in the late 60s, the journalist sought to be a neutral party, as ludicrous as that might sound. None of us are neutral parties. And Hunter Thompson and Tom Wolfe sort of burst out onto the literary scene with what was called the new journalism, where they were intrinsic parts of the stories they were writing about and covering. And Thomas Wolfe released the Electric Kool-Aid Acid Test about Ken Kesey and his merry pranksters, and includes his uptight suit-wearing East Coast New York self, in contrast to these hippies and yippies and the gathered masses. Hunter Thompson starts writing for Rolling Stone and other publications, and it is new journalism, but really, if you're talking about Hunter Thompson, you're talking about gonzo journalism, which is like new journalism, but you're going deep, man. And his writing, his magazine writing, oh my God, his Kentucky Derby article, which is illustrated by Ralph Steadman, is just a fever dream. Spectacularly weird. Hell's Angels was his first book, and it's amazing. All of his books are wonderful. So Hunter Thompson is really important in that regard, of the reporter being part of the story, and bringing you more of a story because of that, not bringing you less of a story. Hunter Thompson is the origin of the phrase, one of God's own prototypes. He says it about his lawyer, Laszlo. I borrowed it for Jamie Heineman because it's such a great phrase. Someone says, and then they say, Oz DeLorean says, given the current media landscape and whether you believe there could ever be another Hunter in a world where we can be so selective about our news delivery and never risk being challenged. That's a wonderful question. You know, I don't, well, I think these unique voices are still going to rise up and be spikes on the graph. It's just whether or not you're able to go find them in the landscape of what you're looking for. It's a wonderful question because, I mean, Thompson's writing, his most famous book is Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, which is a drug-fueled fever dream in which on acid and a whole bunch of other things, he crashes a police convention in Las Vegas in the early 70s. Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas is so magnificent and so amazing. It's not the one you should start with because it's sort of the perfect encapsulation of Hunter Thompson's entire thing, and I regret that it was the first book of his I read. My favorite book of his might be Fear and Loathing on the Campaign Trail, because despite his drug-fueled and crazy narcissistic insanity writing, I'm not saying he was a narcissist, I'm just saying like his writing depicted sort of every psychological condition you could imagine. He also had this incredibly keen eye for sham and illusion. And when you read the art, like Hunter Thompson was stringing for Rolling Stone or some magazine when he saw Jimmy Carter speak early on in the president's race in 1976, and watching Jimmy Carter reset him on his axis. And he writes this amazing article about how inspired he was by this weirdo from Georgia, all of a sudden speaking truth to power in a way he hadn't seen. And the keenness of his observation was really beautiful. Thompson also holds to some of the things that I love about Raymond Chandler's hero: a keen mind, a disgust for sham, and a really dark sense of humor. There's this one moment in Hell's Angels, the book. So in the book Hell's Angels, he embeds with San Francisco Hell's Angels and writes about the experience. At one point, they stomp him, like they beat the crap out of him one night. He throws a party in his house, and the Hell's Angels come, and he was like, he says something about, he's comparing the complaints he got from his neighbors for having a party with the Hells Angels, and says it was worse than when the windows of his house were shut out. And he says it in a way it's like, when the windows of my house were shut out for unknown reasons. And you're like, there's so much more to that story. And he literally just elides any other facts about it except that he shut out the windows of his own house for unexplained reasons. I love what they are doing at Defector. Defector is the editorial and writing team that ran Deadspin, leaving because of equity capital. And Defector, to me, is the media outlet I read to get my Hunter Thompson kind of fix. Because it seems, and I haven't talked to Drew about it, the editor, Drew Magary, but like they seem to hold as a value that the personal experience of the writer is vital to the story. And they've generated some of my favorite political writing. I'm not even into sports. I don't follow many sports at all with any granularity. I have deep respect. I love watching basketball highlights, football highlights, golf highlights, tennis highlights, the Olympics. But I read Defector for that. I read Defector not because it's a sports site. I read it because it's a writer's site, and these writers are writing about the world and themselves, because you can't do anything else. You can't just write about the world. You are always going to be part of that narrative. I would love to know who I don't know about. So loving Hunter Thompson and the whole crew at Defector. I was vat grown on Spy magazine back in the 80s. Tell me what media outlets I should be looking at right now in the comments. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I wanted to briefly mention that you could become a tested member. I know everybody is competing for you to become a member of their thing. What I want to express to you is that the tested membership has become such an important part of the tested family. We get tremendous feedback from the tested members, and they expand the stories that we can tell and the things that we have access to. And you can become a part of it right now by clicking on the link below. See you in the chat.